My archrival got me pregnant. Episode 3. 1 month later, OBGYN office 2. Julian and Lucas stood up almost simultaneously, removed their white coats, and exited through opposite doors, one from the front, the other from the back, vanishing down separate ends of the hallway without a word. Julian had a half-eaten cup of instant porridge in his left hand and was scrolling through his email with the right as he stepped into the underground parking lot. From a distance, he spotted Lucas, the very same man who had just walked the other way upstairs. He paused, deliberated, then walked a few steps in the opposite direction. Lucas, however, had already gotten into his car. With a sharp turn, he pulled up right in front of Julian, rolled down the window, rested an elbow on the frame, and winked. New car, like it? They shared one of the most universal male fascinations: cars. Predictably, as soon as Lucas finished his sentence, Julian's eyes dropped to inspect the vehicle. It was bright yellow, a bit flashy, not Julian's style. But the model, that was a different story. It was a newly released version of a brand Julian had had his eye on for a while. He hadn't gotten around to test driving it, due to work, and later, the pregnancy had killed all interest. As if reading his mind, Lucas stepped out of the car and opened the passenger door for him. Want to try it out? Since their falling out a month ago, they'd hardly spoken. Strictly business, zero personal interaction. The only exception was when Lucas had messaged him after Lily gave birth. Mom and baby are healthy. The irony stung. It was Julian's supposed sister, yet Lucas had broken the news first. Lucas had been true to his word, keeping his distance for weeks. And now suddenly, here he was again. Julian eyed him warily. If I try it, it should be the driver's seat. I left the keys in. What if you drive off? Lucas said with faux concern. I even opened the door for you. Come on, just sit for a second. Julian hesitated. He had a sinking feeling Lucas was up to something. Lucas smirked. If you're scared, just say so. He shrugged and started to close the door. Julian shot him a cold glare and blocked it with one hand. Who's scared? Apparently forgetting he had once been burned by this exact trick 3 months ago. He walked past Lucas to get into the car. Just as he was about to sit down, Lucas grabbed his wrist from behind. Caught off guard, and still holding his porridge, Julian didn't react in time. Click. Cold metal clamped around his wrist. In the blink of an eye, Lucas hauled him into the passenger seat, buckled him in, and slammed the door. Then he hopped into the driver's seat and locked the car. Julian looked down, seatbelt secured, both hands cuffed behind his back. He turned to Lucas, stone-faced. Where did you get handcuffs? Automated retail store. Of course. He couldn't buy condoms, but was apparently a very important person at adult toy kiosks. Lucas, as if reading his mind, added cheerfully, after you scolded me that day, I did some research. You must have a death wish, Julian said. Lucas placed the porridge between them, slipped Julian's phone back into his pocket, and smiled. Apologies. Just following orders. The bright yellow sports car shot down the road, cheery music blaring from the stereo. Julian sat stiffly in silence, quietly calculating the most efficient way to dispose of Lucas's corpse. Eventually, they arrived at Kangjia Private Hospital. Dr. Tang Ki was waiting at the entrance, smiling like he had no idea what he'd just signed his friend up for. When Julian had tested positive for pregnancy, Tang Ke had repeatedly told him to return for a checkup in the 3rd month. But when the time came, Julian kept brushing him off with, I'm busy. Fed up, Tang Ke had gone straight to Lucas. Lucas had scolded Julian thoroughly and promised to get him there no matter what. But when the passenger door opened and Tang Ke saw what Lucas had actually done, he fell silent. So, this was your plan? Julian said through gritted teeth. His voice was cold enough to make Tang Ke shiver. He rushed forward to unbuckle Julian and froze when he saw the handcuffs. He gasped, "You've got to be kidding." Lucas strolled over from the driver's side, spinning the handcuff key in his fingers. He flashed a smug grin. Mission accomplished. Mission? This was more like a suicide attempt. Tongke wisely took 3 steps back. Sure enough, the second Julian's hands were free, he spun around and grabbed Lucas by the wrist, yanking his arm up and pinning him against the car window. Lucas winced. "Go easy." Julian was about to curse him out when Lucas twisted under his grip, reversed the hold, and caught Julian's wrist. They grappled, Julian trying to trip him, Lucas stumbling forward to keep balance, and then Julian ended up sitting on top of him. Lucas managed to twist at the last second so that Julian didn't hit the pavement. Lucas took the fall, cushioning him. Thud. Dust flew. Without hesitation, Julian punched him hard in the shoulder. Lucas grunted, but didn't dodge. Julian stared down at him. "Why didn't you block that?" "Feeling better now?" Lucas asked, propped up on his elbows, looking up at him. His coat collar fluttered in the wind. He pointed to the other shoulder. "If not, go ahead. Hit this one too." And just like that, Julian's fury fizzled. He clicked his tongue, got off, and turned to Tang Ki. "Aren't we doing a checkup?" He glanced at his watch. "Let's go." OBGYN checkup room. 1 month later. Dr. Tang glanced back at the parking lot. Lucas was still sitting on the ground, then quickly caught up with Julian, calling over his shoulder. "3rd floor, hurry up." Lucas gave a half-hearted okay gesture from where he sat, rubbed his shoulder, then stood slowly. After a moment of thought, he went back to his car, changed clothes, spritzed himself with cologne, and finally walked toward the examination building, satisfied. Inside the exam room, Julian lifted his shirt. His abdominal muscles were fading, though no visible bump had emerged yet. At just 3 months, the fetus was barely the size of a pear, and with Julian barely eating, his belly still looked flat, waist still narrow, only with the shirt off and careful inspection could one notice the slightest curve. Lucas walked into this very sight. It was the first time he had seen Julian's abdomen with full awareness. Even though there wasn't much to see, his brain still buzzed. This time, Julian didn't check the monitor himself. He kept his eyes on the ultrasound screen, watching the image shift as Dr. Tang moved the probe. The smooth probe glided over Julian's skin with slight pressure. His gaze drifted from the monitor to the ceiling. The fetus was developing well, slightly smaller than average, but the organs were clearly visible. At 3 months, external genitalia began to differentiate, and Julian could already tell, based on the grayscale blur, it was likely a girl. Tang saw it too, but neither of them said a word. A fetus and a daughter, just 1 word apart, but worlds of difference. This was why early termination mattered, not only because the physical risks increased over time, but also because emotional attachment grew. Yet some people, clearly lacking tact, ruined the silence. "Hey, looks like a girl," Lucas exclaimed. Julian and Tang. It was Lucas's first time seeing his child on an ultrasound. Part nerves, part disbelief, he murmured. "I'm really... her dad?" Julian didn't look at him. "Honestly, I wish you weren't harsh," Lucas muttered. But the rejection didn't dampen his enthusiasm. He leaned in like a med student in his first imaging class, staring intently at the monitor. "Enough," Julian said, motioning for Tang to stop. The screen went black. He wiped off the gel and lowered his shirt. "She's 3 months along. Time for early Down syndrome screening," Tang said. "Want to do it?" Prenatal screenings help detect chromosomal abnormalities. They also ensure both fetus and parent are healthy for any potential procedures. But if termination is inevitable, why bother with the screening? "I'll think about it," Julian replied. "I'll let you know later." Tang nodded. Julian glanced at the clock. I'm heading out. Back in the car, Lucas couldn't hold back anymore. Why skip the screening? I'm not keeping it, Julian said, staring out the window. The road was lined with sweet osmanthus trees, scenting the air. Lucas fell silent. Julian hadn't contacted him in weeks. No word, no magazine reply. The baby was 3 months along. He had assumed that after receiving Dr. Ken's rejection, Julian would drop the idea of surgery. You're not seriously thinking of flying to M country to let that guy operate on you, are you? Julian didn't answer. Julian, Lucas groaned. 200 grand, that's how many years? Of your salary? If you're feeling charitable, donate it. Don't hand it over to some money-worshipping capitalist across the ocean. What do you want me to do then? Julian snapped. Dr. Ken's team wouldn't share any surgical data until their paper was published. But top-tier medical journals take time. Even Tang's contacts couldn't speed it up. If there hadn't been a precedent case, Julian might have accepted the risk, forged ahead with no roadmap. But with a published example out there, both doctors knew it was safer to wait, to do it right. That's why Julian had been stalling, but time was running out. Without data, the safest option was still to fly out and let Dr. Ken operate, but even that wasn't going well. Tang had estimated 3 months to secure a visa. Now, even that seemed optimistic. Julian's case was complex, involving male pregnancy and cross-border birth. Add to that M countries tightening immigration policies. He'd already been denied 3 times. Even if he scraped together the money, he couldn't get in. He rolled down the window, hoping the osmanthus scent would calm him. Instead, he got exhaust fumes. With a bitter sigh, he stared at the lucky cat figurine on Lucas's dashboard. It waved at him cheerfully, oblivious to his misery. The silence stretched. Lucas said nothing. After all, it wasn't his body, wasn't his burden. If they were a real couple, maybe things would be different. But they weren't. They were barely even friends. Longtime rivals, nothing more. No reason for Lucas to care. Just as Julian was about to change the subject, Lucas spoke. Have you ever thought about keeping it? Julian's head whipped around, shocked, but Lucas's face was calm. He pulled into a side parking space. The streetlights had flickered on. Beside the car, the osmanthus trees bloomed without interruption. This time, the scent reached them. Orange light glowed in Lucas's eyes, softening them into something almost tender. 6 months from now, that paper will be out. We'll have data, video. You won't need to beg anyone. I'll do the surgery, one hand on the wheel, the other propping up his head. Lucas glanced at Julian. If you don't want the kid, I'll raise her. I'll cover half the cost, or all of it. You don't even have to see her. He looked down. If you're worried I'll mistreat her later, I won't marry. I'll stay single. I promise. Julian stared at him. You'll need a better reason than martyrdom. Lucas smiled faintly. How about this? I just don't want to watch you hand $200,000 to some greedy bastard. He added, she's not just your kid. I know we've never gotten along. But this isn't me being selfless. You shouldn't have to go through this alone. Julian. He looked at him, voice low but steady. I'm her dad too. Outside, the city was bustling. A sea of people, glowing windows, vendors shouting from blocks away. But inside the car, it was dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. After a long, wordless standoff, Julian finally broke the silence. Take me back to the hospital. He didn't answer Lucas's question directly, instead offering a reason that left no room for argument. I'm on call tonight. You're working the night shift? Lucas was caught off guard. Julian gave a soft, I was planning to go home, take a quick bath, then come back. I don't like the hospital showers. Since my last surgery ended early and I live nearby, I figured I'd change and return. Realizing what he'd done, dragging Julian around all day, Lucas looked mildly guilty. Since being promoted to associate chief, Julian only covered second call. According to hospital policy, he still had to stay overnight, but usually wouldn't be summoned unless the first call ran into serious trouble. Most of the time, second call was much easier. Some even slept through the night. But Julian? Always unlucky. Every time he was on duty, something serious happened. Still, that didn't stop him from solemnly standing at the second call office door and bowing to the night shift god. In their OBGYN department, the night shift god was a pyramid of 7 stacked apples, 1 for each day of the week, meant to bless the night with peace. Lucas followed behind, stunned to see Julian bow with a straight face. "Since when did you start believing in this superstitious stuff? You always rolled your eyes at it," Julian replied flatly. "Since I got pregnant." Lucas's gaze trembled. Later, Julian leaned back on the lounge bed, sipping warm water and reviewing a PowerPoint for the next day's lecture. When he saw Lucas still loitering, he raised an eyebrow. "Why are you still here?" Lucas stared at the glass in Julian's hand. "Don't you think plain water tastes awful? If that's your only reason for staying." Julian downed the rest in one go, water glinting on his lips. "I think it's fine. You're not going to sleep?" Julian glanced back at his tablet. "I'm lecturing at a university tomorrow. Need to go over my slides one last time." 4 hours? Yeah. 8 to noon. Doctors who taught often said lectures were worse than surgeries. Pulling a full shift, then going straight to class was a kind of hell unique to medicine. Unlike surgeries, lectures had no breaks, no room for error, no place to sit, and if students didn't ask questions, the supervisor would. One attending even had a heart attack mid-lecture about heart attacks. Lucas suddenly took the tablet from Julian's hands. Julian looked at him, puzzled. "Go to sleep. I'll cover for you." "You won't enjoy it," Julian said. "I always draw the critical cases." Lucas held the tablet out of reach like he was bribing a toddler. "I've got great luck. Tonight will be peaceful. Sleep here if it makes you feel better. What about you?" "There's only one bed. I'll pull an all-nighter," Lucas said, plopping down at the desk. "It's been ages since I played a game." He booted up the tablet. Julian's devices never had a lock screen or personal wallpaper, just default system settings. Still, Lucas was surprised to find an old online game from over a decade ago. Julian didn't stop him from playing. He rolled over to rest. Moments later, Lucas called out, "Julian, it's been 1 minute and I already got destroyed." In the beginner's zone, the account was clearly new. Julian hadn't played much either. Lucas sighed. "Damn it. This is your fault. I don't even know what else I'm good at anymore besides work." "There's a copy of the biology of cancer on the desk," Julian said, without looking up. "Might teach you you're not that good at work either." "Thanks." Lucas stared at the massive textbook, reconsidered his life choices, then put down the tablet and cracked the book open. It was a classic oncology reference, thick, dry, in English. Pages were stuffed with Julian's handwritten notes, increasingly messy over the years, but as a fellow doctor, Lucas could still follow. Once he got into the rhythm, he lost track of time. Maybe Julian's luck really was cursed. Maybe Lucas's good luck canceled it out. Either way, the night passed unusually quietly. It wasn't until early morning that the first call came. Placental abruption major. Hemorrhage. Lucas sprang into action. Even though he moved fast, the door still creaked. Julian stirred. Before he could ask, Lucas said, "It's nothing. Sleep." Somehow that single sentence worked. Julian, usually a light sleeper, drifted off again. By dawn, Lucas returned. The patient, a mother of twins, was safe. Boy and a girl. Twins were considered the jackpot in obstetrics. Dragon Phoenix twins, even more so. Lucas wanted to tell Julian, but seeing him asleep, he hesitated. Instead of texting, fearing the alert would wake him, he reached for a sticky note. He wrote a few words, then froze. When had he started wanting to share things with Julian? After a moment, he crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. His mind was restless. He couldn't read anymore. He returned the tablet to the bedside, pulled up a chair, and sat down, suddenly remembering something old. That game on Julian's tablet? They used to be good at it. Their first meeting wasn't at medical school. It was at an internet cafe in B City. The night after college entrance exams, Lucas hadn't even changed out of his uniform. He rented a computer for the night. That's when he noticed another boy in a red school jacket, clearly from 6th High. Lucas was from 4th High, the city's other top school. The rivalry ran deep. Both claimed to be first, down to matching their uniforms. Identical styles, just different colors. He sat next to the red-jacketed boy, who didn't spare him a glance. 10 fingers flew across the keyboard. They were playing the same co-op game. When the round ended, Lucas offered, "Team up?" The boy responded, "No noobs." "Good." Lucas grinned. "Neither am I." They teamed up on a whim and turned out to be perfectly in sync. They played until dawn. In the morning, the cafe owner brought over newspapers with the exam answer keys. They compared results. "How'd you do?" Lucas asked, tossing his pencil aside. The new friend smirked. "We'll meet in the papers." At that time, the B City Daily was the city's main news source. Every year, it printed the names and photos of the top scorers. Lucas raised a brow. "What's your name?" "Julian Grant." They didn't know then that their names had already been used in school. Board betting pools. Which school would claim the science top score? "Lucas Shaw," he said before Julian could ask. "We'll meet in the paper. But it won't be me seeing you. It'll be you seeing me." 1 month later, both names and photos appeared on opposite pages. Just like a wedding announcement, the headline screamed, "Two science champions emerge in B City," with a subheading, 4th versus 6th, which star will shine brighter? They became local legends and lifelong rivals. Now, that once shared game was buried. Julian barely touched it, and when he did, he lost in the beginner zone. Medicine had consumed them. It required talent and relentless repetition. "Things might have been easier if we hadn't gone to college together," Lucas murmured. He paused. "Do you regret it?" Julian didn't answer. Lucas smiled sadly and started to get up. When Julian suddenly groaned, Lucas spun around. Julian was curled up, forehead damp with sweat, clutching his leg, cramping. It wasn't the first time. Early symptoms had improved, but the baby's rapid growth meant Julian's calcium levels couldn't keep up. The night, cramps were back. Lucas moved fast, kneeling beside the bed. He pressed into Julian's leg. Slow, firm, accurate. Julian's pained expression slowly eased. "Does this happen a lot?" Lucas asked. Julian, still half asleep, gave a faint He never showed weakness during the day, even at the worst of morning. Sickness, his face remained composed. Sometimes Lucas forgot he was even pregnant. Only at night did the toll quietly show. "Sleep," Lucas said softly. "I'll stay. If it happens again, I'll help." Julian didn't respond. Or maybe he did, but he was already drifting off. Lucas stayed beside him, gaze soft. When Julian woke the next morning, Lucas was gone. He reached for his phone, but instead found a warm glass of milk by the bed. Perfect temperature. Underneath was a note. "Drink this before class. You're low on calcium. P.S. Delivered a placental abruption last night. Boy-girl twins." Julian stared at the note. Lucas's handwriting was sharp, bold. The exclamation mark almost sparkled. He turned the paper. On the back was one more line. "P.P.S. Have you thought about living together? After finishing his morning lecture, Julian stood outside a medical university's cafeteria for 10 full minutes, parched and indecisive. In the end, he settled on a savory pancake from the noodle window. Ever since the pregnancy, the same man who once survived entire exam months on plain bread had become inexplicably picky about food. A university's cafeteria was infamous. Its food was inversely proportional to the institution's academic reputation, overpriced and consistently terrible for decades. When he finally returned to the hospital, Julian tossed the remaining half of the pancake into the trash without hesitation. As soon as he entered the department, he thought of that note and instinctively glanced toward Lucas's workstation. Empty. He looked away and hadn't even set down his bag when Evan popped out of nowhere and waggled his eyebrows. "Hey, Dr. Grant, your girlfriend's real cute." That one sentence instantly ignited a gossip frenzy in the office. Whispered voices rose all around. Someone even teased, "So when's the wedding?" "We want an invite." Julian frowned. "What girlfriend?" "Oh, come on," said Dr. Wu, smiling like a wise elder. "She brought you a homemade lunch. Said she was looking for you. So we told her you were giving a lecture and let her wait in the break room. You didn't even tell your girlfriend about your schedule? She almost left." Julian didn't respond. He turned on his heel and walked briskly toward the break room, completely missing Lucas, who had just exited the elevator with a crate of milk. As Lucas stepped into the office, he ran right into a smug Evan, who pointed toward Julian's desk and said, "Looking for Dr. Grant?" Lucas lifted the milk slightly. "Where is he?" Evan, Julian's favorite student and Lucas's least favorite person, didn't miss a beat. He went to see his girlfriend. Girlfriend? Lucas's expression changed. Evan's grin widened, like he'd just scored a personal victory. "Yup, pretty. Girl too. Brought lunch. Not like someone." He eyed the milk in Lucas's hand and added with a smirk, "Who has to drink dairy alone?" "Lucas." Seeing Lucas's face darken, Evan wisely backed off, retreating to savor the moment in private. He was only disappointed that Julian hadn't witnessed Lucas's expression. Lucas stood still for a moment, then slammed the milk down on his desk. The sound made Dr. Wu glance up. Lucas met his gaze. Dr. Wu. Was what Evan said true? Wu wasn't sure whether to nod or shake his head. Lucas looked off, but Wu couldn't figure out why. Yes, Lucas and Julian had once both been interested in Dr. Zhonglan, but this visitor clearly wasn't her. Was Lucas upset that Julian had a new girlfriend before he did? But Lucas had admirers lined up around the block. If he wanted a girlfriend, he could have one yesterday. The nurses from the neonatal unit flirted with him all the time, and yet he never showed real interest. As someone who always tried to keep peace between the two, Dr. Wu carefully suggested, "Don't take it too hard, Lucas. If you want, I'll ask my wife to introduce you to someone even better." Lucas forced a smile, straw between his lips. "Thanks, but don't trouble her." The fake cheer in his voice gave Wu goosebumps. Meanwhile, Julian reached the break room and spotted a girl sitting inside through the window, dressed sweetly and holding a tall food container. She stood as soon as he entered. "Hi, I'm Yu Xin," she said brightly. "You're Dr. Grant, right?" Julian nodded and shook her hand politely. His eyes dropped to the four-tiered stainless steel lunchbox in her hand. Yu Xin noticed and said, "Your aunt asked me to bring this for you." "My aunt?" Julian blinked. His parents lived in B City. The only relative he had in a city was his aunt. Yu Xin continued, "I'm the blind date she arranged for you." Julian was speechless. Apparently, his mother had activated marriage mode so aggressively that she'd deputized his aunt to execute local operations. He remembered her joking about letting your aunt help you meet someone. Clearly, it hadn't been a joke. And just when he thought it couldn't get worse, Yushin said cheerfully. Our moms met at the matchmaking corner in Shangjiang Park. Julian nearly choked. He knew that park. It was infamous. Parents haggled over children's dating credentials like produce vendors. His aunt had probably plastered his photo across a stand shouting, PhD, doctor, stable income. He imagined it vividly and felt a phantom heart attack. Yushin, open and straightforward, noticed his expression. To be honest, I didn't expect anything from that place. When my mom showed me your photo, I thought it was photoshopped. She eyed him again. Didn't think you'd look even better in person. Julian managed a stiff smile. Thanks. You're very pretty, too. Yushin plopped down and began unpacking the lunchbox. Want to eat together? Julian hadn't had a home-cooked meal in ages. The colorful dishes did tempt him a bit. He sat. They each took a portion and began eating quietly. Midway, Shin asked, ever had a girlfriend? Julian shook his head and sipped some milky fish soup. I heard you used to pursue a female doctor from your department. She pressed. Yes. He had once used his fake pursuit of Zhonglan to pacify his mom. During her last marriage campaign, apparently the story had spread to his aunt. Julian gave an awkward M&M and didn't elaborate. Yushin, sensing the story was ancient history, smiled. So, what do you think of me? I'm a freelance illustrator, she said. Always wanted to date a doctor. My mom figured the only way to meet one was through matchmaking. Julian hesitated, then set down his chopsticks. Sorry, Miss Yu. You're great, but due to some private circumstances, I'm not in a place to date. Right now. My mom doesn't know yet. Sorry for wasting your time. Let's be real. He just unexpectedly slept with Lucas, had psychological trauma, and was pregnant. Going on a date now would practically be fraud. Yushin's expression shifted subtly. That's okay, she said. We just met. Julian pulled out a parking voucher from his wallet. You came all this way. This is a hospital parking card. Covers 200 hours. Practical as ever. Julian thought nothing of giving a date. A parking pass. Yushin blinked. That's not necessary. Jiwa charges 30 an hour. Julian said seriously. Just take it. She studied him. Expressionless, aloof, thin lips, glasses, distant, intimidating, but also, apparently frugal and surprisingly grounded. She grinned and pocketed the card. In return, I'll draw you something. Follow me on Weibo. Julian paused. What's Weibo? Yushin was stunned, then quietly took back her phone. For a second, Julian looked like her grandpa fumbling with a flip phone. Her disappointment vanished entirely. I'll print it and mail it, she offered. No need. Julian didn't really care. Seeing they were done eating, he asked, Mind if I clean up? I'll help. Yushin stood as well. Just then, the door burst open. A familiar voice rang out, half amused, half mocking. Heard your girlfriend's here. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about. A carton of milk arced gracefully through the air into the trash bin. Lucas stood in the doorway, wearing a tan shirt layered over a black turtleneck. Julian, he said with a tight smile. Aren't you going to introduce us? Lucas Shaw, Julian said, introducing him to Yushin, a colleague from my department. Nice to meet you, Dr. Shaw. Yushin responded politely, extending her hand with a smile. I'm Julian's blind date, but we're not dating or anything. Lucas gave a non-committal O, and though Yushin wasn't sure if it was her imagination, it seemed like the faint tension around him visibly relaxed the moment she said they weren't a couple, like a breath released. That's a relief. Lucas chuckled as he shook her hand, his grin laced with playful arrogance. Julian's got the personality of a sterile scalpel, cold, sharp, and too clean for anyone to handle. He paused, biting back the final word that would have revealed too much, then smoothly finished. You're way out of his league. You Sheen. This was by far the most unfiltered, sabotaging introduction she'd ever witnessed. Moments ago, Julian's co-workers had been singing his praises as a hard-working, incorruptible professional, yet now, his so-called colleague was roasting him mercilessly, and Julian was just letting it happen. In fact, the next second, Lucas casually slung an arm around Julian's shoulders and pulled him in slightly. Yushin's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the table. Later that day, in the parking lot of Jiwa Hospital, Yushin clutched her phone, giddy as she recounted everything to her best friend. I just met the doctor, and he's way hotter in person. He even gave me a parking voucher. No way. So are you gonna shoot your shot? Her friend squealed. No, listen. Yushin was practically vibrating with excitement. I think he might be gay. Like, he literally told me he's never had a girlfriend, and he said for private reasons he's not dating anyone right now. Plus, he hasn't even told his parents. Sounds fishy, right? And get this. After lunch, this insanely good-looking guy showed up like he was claiming territory. Girl, of course. All the hot ones are either taken or gay. Did you get a pic? Yushin quickly sent a snapshot she'd taken after they parted. Julian had offered to escort her downstairs, but she'd insisted on leaving alone. As she walked off, she'd turned and discreetly snapped a photo of Julian and Lucas from behind at the elevator. I swear, she continued. As I left, that guy pulled Julian aside at the window, like he was confronting him. It looked intense. Her friend cackled. He's panicking. The photo showed two tall men by a window. One leaned casually, a hint of exasperation on his face. The other stood rigid, arms crossed, back to the camera, but radiating pressure. Lucas's gaze didn't waver. Was your cute little love lunch tasty? Julian gave him a flat look. What? You were enjoying yourself just a second ago. Cat got your tongue? Julian rubbed his nose bridge, then stared back. What the hell is wrong? With you? Lucas smirked. So your trip to M Country, was that just a cover to go on? A blind date? Damn. I underestimated how eager you are to get married. Julian's expression iced over. You interrogating me now? Do I need to? Lucas snapped. She came to the hospital looking for you. That escalated real fast, didn't it? His smile was razor thin. You know what? Don't call me to cover your shifts anymore. I'm not a damn saint. I'm not pulling night duty so you can take my daughter and go flirt with someone else. Julian's temper flared. I was already being polite in front of her. What are you trying to prove now? He shoved past Lucas and marched toward the exit. As he brushed by, their shoulders collided. Fine, don't take my shifts. I never begged you to. Julian, Lucas yelled behind him. Oh, so you're allowed to date, and I'm not even allowed to say anything? Lucas snapped, kicking a nearby stool hard enough to rattle the window. You got any heart in there at all? Julian pointed to the security camera overhead. Vandalism, huh? Congrats. You're on record. He didn't look back as the elevator doors opened. He stepped in and hit the close button with zero hesitation. Lucas looked up. The camera's red light blinked at him like a judgmental eye. Perk, he muttered, and kicked the stool again. For days, the OBGYN department's mood was frosty. Julian and Lucas, who had just begun to thaw, were back at sub-zero. Any time they were in the same room, the temperature dropped 10 degrees. If a mosquito flew in, it would freeze mid-air. Fortunately, both were usually too busy to be around at the same time. But Evan glanced at Julian, who had just lugged his laptop into Office 3. Gods may fight, but mortals suffer. And students? Worst of all. Office 1 was for the department chair. Office 2 housed the attending and associate physicians. Office 3 was for residents and interns, especially those under Julian's supervision. With their strict professor now in-house, the students were on high alert every day. Shaole, Julian barked as he shoved open the door. The room fell silent. The named intern froze, hand half raised. "Yes, Dr. Grant. You're coming to clinic with me. Meet me at the elevator." He didn't even step inside, just delivered the order and left. Shale sprang to her feet, grabbed her notebook and hurried after him, only to freeze at the hallway. Standing 10 meters away was her grim-faced advisor. Right next to him, like some kind of walking threat, was Dr. Lucas Shaw, calmly strolling up, full of mischief. "Oh? Clinic duty today?" Lucas grinned, bending toward Shale like he didn't see Julian standing right there. Shale wanted to disappear. "I'm heading to clinic too," Lucas said casually. "If Dr. Grant doesn't teach you well, just sneak into my group." Julian shot him a look. "I heard your students ranked dead last in the last quiz. Maybe worry about them first." "Just a pop quiz," Lucas retorted. "Didn't see you mention how your student almost dropped the surgical dummy from shock during the skills assessment. Seems like you're aiming for scariest mentor again this year. Shale, make sure to vote for your teacher." "Shale, intern, please. I am but a humble intern. Spare me." Ding! The elevator arrived. She sighed with relief. Finally, escape. The doors opened to a packed crowd, doctors, family members, patients. She squeezed into a corner and prayed Julian and Lucas would be split. Up. Nope. As the doors closed, she looked up and nearly screamed. Julian was wedged by the wall. Lucas was pressed chest to chest with him. Shale covered her ears and chanted mentally, "Please don't fight. Please don't fight." Julian glared. Lucas, using the crowd as cover, blocked Julian's foot with his own. "Don't move," he whispered into Julian's ear. The warm breath tickled. Julian hissed, "Back off. If I wasn't worried about our daughter getting crushed, I wouldn't bother." Lucas smirked. "You... what?" "Say it." Julian scowled. More people crammed in. Lucas hooked an arm around Julian's shoulder, pulling him close like they were lovers. Julian tried to push him off, but the elevator was too crowded. He couldn't move. "Could you not press your hand there?" Lucas muttered. "Or at least move it." Julian yanked his hand back, only to realize Lucas's eyes had gone weird. "Seriously?" Julian whispered, pinching Lucas's side. "What the hell is in your brain all day?" "Ow." Lucas winced. "Not my fault. Your hand moved first." Julian turned away, furious, and focused on the floor number countdown. "Julian," Lucas said, amused, "you have a mole on your earlobe, or so, and your ears are turning red. Keck off." Finally, the doors opened. Shale breathed out a massive sigh of relief. At least, they hadn't fought. Julian bolted like a man on a mission, disappearing down the hallway. Shale followed, only to see Lucas trailing behind, hands in his pockets, looking smug as hell. "Shale," Julian said suddenly, "is my ear red?" "No." Julian exhaled, spun around, and glared at Lucas, who grinned and made a finger gun. Before he could fire, Julian turned away again. "After clinic, talk to maintenance," Julian said to Shale. "Have them install a new elevator for the inpatient wing." Shale, "Excuse me?" "Use Dr. Shaw's department funds. Tell them I suggested it." Shale. "OBGYN outpatient department, clinic building." Julian had changed into a fresh white coat. His cuffs were buttoned neatly. A cold stethoscope hung around his neck, and a blue and white name badge was clipped to his chest pocket. Compared to how he just looked in front of Lucas, Julian now seemed far more composed. He took a sip of tea, pushed his half-rim glasses higher on the bridge of his nose, glanced over the registration list, and clicked start calling. The first few cases were follow-ups from the morning, likely patients, who had just received their test results. The first new case was a woman, in her early 40s. She entered the room, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, and looked rather uncomfortable. "Sit," Julian said. Oh, okay. She gingerly lowered herself into the chair. Julian glanced at the screen. Ms. Xu Fang Ruan? Yes, she replied with a nervous nod. What brings you in today? He asked, looking at her. Ruan's lips trembled, but no words came. Just say it plainly. It's all right. Julian had seen many patients like her. Unlike other departments, gynecology patients often carry deep-seated shame rooted in old traditions, especially older, less educated women and young teenage girls. Standing nearby, Shaolei stole a glance at Julian. Behind his mask, only his eyes were visible. Calm, patient, not a trace of annoyance or judgment. His gaze invited trust. Julian's demeanor with patients was entirely different from how he treated interns. Shaolei had noticed that the very first day. She remembered what Julian told her then. Patients aren't students. You're not here to teach them. You're here to help. Eventually, Ruan found her voice. Staring at the desk, she whispered, It hurts every time I have sex with my husband. I don't know why. I don't want to do it anymore, but he gets angry. How long has this been going on? Julian asked, beginning to write the chart. 2 or 3 months. Any bleeding afterward? She looked startled. How'd you know? Once the ice broke, she became more fluent, and my periods are irregular too. I thought maybe it's menopause? Any history of HPV? Yes, but that was over 10 years ago. The doctor back then said it was due to low immunity and that it was cured. She looked confused and ashamed. Julian paused, then exchanged a glance with Shaolei. He gestured toward the adjacent exam room. We'll do a physical exam. Would you like a female doctor present? Some patients preferred not to be examined alone by a male doctor, and Julian always respected that. Ruan hesitated, then nodded toward Shaolei. Shaolei closed the door, pulled the curtain, and helped Ruan onto the exam table. Julian washed up, put on gloves, and was just reaching for the instruments when the clinic door slammed open. Reflexively, Julian pulled a sheet over the patient. A large man reeking of alcohol barged in and yanked open the curtain. Which one of you is Julian Grant? Julian frowned. I am. We're in the middle of an exam. Please step out. And wait. The man just advanced. You got some nerve, you perv. A male doctor. Doing gynecology? You disgusting bastard. Ruan shot up on the table. Mahao? What are you doing here? What do you think? He roared. You came here to let some man touch you, didn't you? Shut up, Ruan shrieked, on the verge of tears. He's a real doctor. I'm here for a real exam. No decent man becomes a gynecologist, Mahao shouted, pointing at Julian. He lunged at him. Shaolei stepped forward to stop him, but he raised a hand to strike her. In the blink of an eye, Julian grabbed his wrist and slammed him face first onto the desk. What the hell? Mahao tried to fight back, but Julian twisted his arm behind his back and shoved a knee into his spine. You try anything else, I'll snap your wrist, Julian warned, and he meant it. Mahao, stunned, cried, Aren't you supposed to be a doctor? Why are you attacking me? Julian actually laughed. Oh, right. He switched hands, unbuttoned his coat with one hand, shrugged it off, and flung it onto a chair. Then, without pause, slammed Mahao back, down, harder this time. Julian now wore a fitted white shirt, sleeves rolled just past his wrists. Veins popped along his forearms as he pinned the man down. Let me reintroduce myself, he said evenly. Julian Grant, member of a City Close Combat Association. Now may I hit you? What? Before Mahao could answer, Julian efficiently dislocated his wrist. The scream that followed rang through the clinic. The tough guy crumpled in an instant. Dr. Grant, please, put it back. Please, Mahao begged. Julian remained calm. Good. Now maybe you'll remember this pain next. Time your wife says she hurts. Mahao, sobbing, nodded like a bobblehead. Shaole stood frozen, stunned by everything. Dr. Grant, is this okay? Her medical school professors had always said to avoid direct confrontation. This was not that. Julian didn't even flinch. You mean him or me? Never mind. Then the door creaked open again. Oh? Quite a scene, Lucas drawled, leaning casually in the doorway. Dr. Shaw? Shaole stammered. Lucas smiled at her. If you're worried about Dr. Grant, maybe go call security instead of standing around. Shaole jolted into motion, but Lucas waved her off. No need. I called them when I heard the crash. He turned to Julian and smirked. Your good friend Dr. Shaw, once again, saving the day. How will you thank me? Julian threw him a look, difficult to read. Ruan had climbed down from the table and stood trembling, looking between the two men, then at her husband pinned to the desk. She finally said, Serves you right. You never respected doctors, she scolded. Now look what you got. Babe, please, Mahao whimpered. Ask him to fix my wrist. At that moment, the security team burst in, batons ready. They stopped, short, shocked at the scene. Dr. Grant? One asked. What's going on? Julian calmly released Mahao. He tried to attack me. Lucas raised his hand. I can confirm that. Shell chimed in. Me too. Mahao gawked between them. He didn't even know who Lucas was. Why was this guy helping? Lucas leaned against the wall, snapped a photo, and grinned. Before security escorted Mahao out, Julian finally took pity on him. With a sharp pull and a swift push, he popped Mahao's dislocated wrist back into place. If it still hurts, spray some Yunnan Baya when you get home. In the waiting area, no one knew what had actually happened inside. They'd seen an angry man storm in, and shortly after, a squad of security guards drag him out. Whispers swirled. Had there been a fight? Was someone hurt? Would an injured doctor be wheeled out next? But even after they'd had their own appointments and left, no one saw any bloody scene or stretcher. At the end of clinic hours, the doctors from each exam room stepped out, almost simultaneously. Julian slipped off his white coat and walked out of his room, only to run into Lucas exiting the one across the hall. No, thank you, Lucas said casually. Ever since that nasty argument, the two had hardly spoken. When they did, it was snide and bitter. But today, Julian glanced at him. Thanks, he said. Because Lucas didn't interrupt this time, the words actually came out. Whole. Lucas looked surprised. You sure you're okay? That guy didn't smack your head, did he? I can't believe I just heard you say that, Julian replied. Then I take it back. New. Julian gave him a look. Lucas raised his hands in surrender. Fine. Fine. Got it. You're not hurt. Stop glaring. You're making me think you're about to bash my skull in. Julian looked away, but Lucas kept talking. Good you're not hurt, he said softly, then suddenly chuckled. Guess all our past brawls weren't for nothing. Julian's eyes flickered. Lucas's comment stirred a memory. Julian's first exposure to hand-to-hand combat had been a university PE class. He'd been a model student growing up, rarely involved in fights. Aside from a brief childhood stint in Taekwondo, he was squeaky clean, until a medical university declared self-defense mandatory for doctors and made close combat a required course. And mandatory meant graded. Grades affected GPAs. Because medical students had heavy course loads, the university assigned classes by cohort, no electives. So Julian and Lucas ended up in the same hand-to-hand class. It became their new battlefield. The course grade was made up of movement tests, fitness assessments, and a final one-on-one match. For fairness, students were ranked by performance and paired, first versus second, third versus fourth, and so on. Naturally, Julian and Lucas tied for first, so the instructor, blissfully. Unaware of the chaos he'd unleashed, paired them together. Other pairs finished in 5 minutes. Julian and Lucas fought through the entire class with no winner. The instructor had to stop them before someone ended up in the hospital. He gave them each 1.5 bonus points. They weren't satisfied, demanded a rematch. Eventually, the exhausted instructor gave up and just refereed them. Weakly. Still no winner. Finally, desperate to reclaim his weekends, he gave them both 3 bonus points and a lecture on sportsmanship and friendship. They replied in unison, "We're not friends." The instructor nearly had a stroke. After that, he begged to never teach their class again. Julian glanced at Lucas, who was laughing at the memory, and realized something strange. The majority of fights in his life had been with this guy. As if reading his mind, Lucas said, "Remember that time we nearly gave the PE teacher hypertension because you wouldn't back down during the finals?" Julian gave him a sideways glare. "Like you weren't stubborn? I remember one semester we had 12 courses, all with labs. I was pulling all-nighters just to cram, completely wrecked. I begged you to stop competing, said, let's sleep instead." Lucas mimicked Julian's voice. "Sure, if you're fine being second." Julian stared at him. "Okay." That did sound like something he would have said. "You're smiling," Lucas said, pointing at him. "You never smile. That's why. I like seeing it. It's rare. Valuable." Julian glanced down at his mask. Lucas added, "Even with the mask on, I can tell you smile with your eyes." And it was true. When Julian smiled, the tiny mole beneath his eye always came alive. Julian turned his head away, hands in his coat pockets. "I'm leaving." He didn't go back to the office, but instead headed to the lab building. He hadn't been there in a few days. As an associate chief physician, essentially a clinical associate professor, he mentored several grad students. Most experiments no longer required his hands-on work. Besides, with the pregnancy, he avoided direct exposure to lab chemicals. Mostly, he reviewed reports, edited papers, and guided the research direction. Today, he helped one young student use the confocal microscope. By the time he left, it was past 9 p.m. Back in his doctoral and attending years, Julian used to work late in the lab almost daily, sometimes until 2 or 3 a.m. He didn't have his own lab back then and worked in Professor Monroe's group. Around midnight, the lab emptied out, leaving only Julian and Lucas, sitting silently at opposite benches, immersed in experiments. Sometimes they walked home together under the moon, too tired to even bicker, brains still running over unsolved problems. Warm water enveloped Julian in the bath. For once, he wasn't thinking about work. Lately, with the baby leaching his nutrients, he'd been more easily distracted. His thoughts often drifted back to odd, half-forgotten memories, like a dessert shop he used to pass on his way from the lab to the dorm. It sold steamed rice puddings, rare in a city. He had never tried them. He'd always been intrigued by the colorful crystal-like display in the window, but the shop closed at 10, and he usually got off work too late. By the time he moved out of the dorm and bought his apartment, he no longer passed that route. And he was never the type to go out of his way for food. So, years passed, and he never got a single bite. Julian was never a foodie. He bought one flavor of instant noodles in bulk. That dessert craving? Long forgotten. But tonight, sitting in his robe, poking at his noodles with a plastic fork, that memory came back, sharp and strange. Pregnancy did that to him, gave him cravings he never had before. Pickled lemons, stinky tofu, a very specific scallion pancake from a street vendor, and only if made by the vendor himself, not his son. He always suppressed those cravings. But tonight, he didn't want to. He remembered calling his mom after his blind date with Yu Xin. Her voice had been soft. "Xiao Shu, I know you're busy and you're working hard. I don't mind if you don't want to date. I just worry you're alone." eating irregularly, sleeping irregularly. You've always been like this since you were a kid. Once you start working, you forget everything else. I thought if someone could live with you, remind you to eat, take care of you, maybe I could worry less. Every time your father and I read about some professor or doctor collapsing from exhaustion, we get so scared. What if something happened to you? What if no one was there to call 911? Julian stared at his phone. Then, for the first time, he gently placed a hand on his belly. "Hello?" he said into the phone. "Julian." Lucas sounded surprised. "It's late. What's up?" "That note you left, does the offer still stand?" Julian asked. "Huh?" Julian's voice was calm. "Yafeng Apartments, Building 3, Unit 4, Room 1202. Come before 10:30. Bring your luggage and the rice puddings." From the shop near the lab, the fast food restaurant was about to close. 3 doctors, who happened to end up together, were eating a late-night meal. Li Sheng and Zhang Cheng watched as Lucas Shaw picked up a phone call, then froze in place like a wax figure, holding his phone in the air, without moving an inch. "What's wrong?" Li Sheng asked. Lucas snapped out of it, glanced at the call that had already been cut off, then checked the time on his phone. "Seriously," he muttered under his breath. "Julian Grant must be out of his mind. Does he have a built-in countdown clock or something?" "That was Julian?" Zhang Cheng asked. The last time Julian summoned Lucas away with a single text, the two had been grilling skewers together. Now, same setup, déjà vu. He half joked. "What's Her Majesty ordering? You to do this time?" Lucas didn't respond. He got up, draped his coat over his arm, and paid the bill. "You two go ahead and eat," he told them. "I've got something to handle." He patted Li Sheng's shoulder in passing and flagged down a cab that had just happened to roll by. "Something at the hospital?" Li Sheng asked, confused. "Did you just say Her Majesty? Is that your nickname for Dr. Grant? Does he know?" Li Sheng was a rotating resident from another hospital, currently in Lucas's group, unlike Zhang Cheng, who was an attending in OBGYN, and a former classmate of both Lucas and Julian. Li Sheng didn't speak as casually and still carried a trace of formality. Zhang Cheng was puzzled too. Once was coincidence, but this was the second time Lucas had dashed off. Considering how things stood between Julian and Lucas, it was hard to believe this was a personal matter, so he agreed with Li Sheng's guess. Probably Her Majesty. Li Sheng still wanted to ask, "Just eat." Zhang Cheng cut him off, lowering his voice with a warning. "Whatever you do, don't let Julian hear you say that." But while his colleagues assumed Lucas was rushing off for something urgent at the hospital, he was in fact bickering with a cab driver over something entirely personal. "Sir, please, just wait 5 minutes. I'll be back right after I buy something." Lucas glanced at the rice pudding shop owner, who was halfway through pulling down the shutter. His palms were sweating from urgency. This area was terrible for catching a cab, so his plan was to have the driver wait while he ran in and got what he needed. Otherwise, if things dragged out, there was no way he'd make it back to Julian before the deadline. "Do you know how many rides I can get in 5 minutes? And you're barely going far. I won't make anything off you. Better to take a new fare and earn the base rate." The driver started gesturing for him to get out. Lucas didn't hesitate. He pulled a 100 yuan bill from his wallet and handed it over. "Please, sir, I'm really in a hurry." The driver's expression changed in an instant. His eyes lit up as he pocketed the cash without blinking, like a face-changing master from Sichuan opera, shifting into a smiling grandpa in a split second. "There aren't many suckers left in this world. Gotta take what you can," he said cheerfully. "No problem. Uncle here has a good heart. Never in a rush." Lucas was momentarily stunned. First time meeting someone as shameless as himself. The driver smiled kindly. "Don't just sit there, go." Lucas opened the door and jogged to the rice pudding shop. The shopkeeper saw him coming and shouted from afar, "We're closed, come back tomorrow." Lucas mirrored the earlier gesture, slapped another red bill on the table. "Please, I really need to buy something. I'm in a hurry." But this guy turned out to be a man of principle, immune to bribery. He waved his hand. "No way. Closed means closed. Everything's in the back. Now, I've got to get home and put my kid to bed." Of course, principled men are often weak to emotional appeals. "Boss." Lucas instantly changed tones, his voice dropping low, eyes just barely watery. He pointed toward the towering building of Jua Hospital. "I have a partner, frail, bedridden. The doctor said he probably won't make it past tonight. His dying wish was just one more bite of your rice pudding." The shopkeeper looked him up and down, skeptical. "You're serious?" Lucas nodded heavily, eyes full of emotion. "Please, consider it an act of kindness. He'll bless you from above. And if not, he might become a spirit, haunting your shop day and night. Enough, enough." The burly shopkeeper shivered all over. It was chilly, out, but the air felt colder now. He rubbed his arms, as if the ghost was already circling the storefront. "Thanks so much, boss." Lucas dropped the spooky voice and replaced it with earnest gratitude, smiling so warmly you'd never think he'd just threatened a haunting. The shopkeeper cleared his throat awkwardly, sighed, and said, "All right. Who told me to be a man of honor?" He paused mid-roll of the shutter, headed to the back and yelled, "What flavor does your wife like?" "Red bean." Lucas didn't bother correcting him. No time for semantics. "Got it." The shopkeeper didn't hesitate. He didn't even ask how many. He packed up all the red bean ones left and handed them over. "This is way too much." "No charge." The man waved him off. "You said it was charity. Just take it. I really have to go. My son's waiting." Even Lucas, with a face thick as armor, couldn't quite pocket this for free. He offered money several times, but was refused. Finally, Lucas pulled out a Jua Hospital parking card. "This is good for 200 hours. Please take it." The shopkeeper hesitated. "That hospital charges insane rates. We never even drive when we go. It's too expensive." "This must cost a lot." Doctors and nurses practically lived at the hospital. If they had to pay the same parking fees as the public, their wages wouldn't cover it. Lucas and his colleagues got internal pricing. Recently, the hospital had a promotion: buy 5, get 1 free, buy 10, get 2. To prevent scalping, each staff member had a limit on how many they could buy. Maybe 1 or 2 extra to gift to friends and family. Lucas had bought the max, enough to park through the next campaign. If you counted the value, one card was probably worth about as much as the puddings. But he didn't want to expose himself as a doctor, and besides, he had a story to maintain. So he kept up the somber act and said, "He's gone now. I won't be needing it anymore. Please, boss, stay healthy." The man clutched the card as if it weighed 1,000 pounds, then nodded solemnly. Having sent the shopkeeper off, Lucas strolled back to the cab, bag of pudding in hand. After a moment of thought, he gave half to the driver. He had a strong suspicion that if he brought all of this to Julian, he'd be met with a glare and a sarcastic, "What, am I a pig?" The driver, delighted with both the money and the dessert, grinned and joked, "You off to see your girlfriend?" Lucas lit up his phone and checked the time. He replied earnestly, "Not a girlfriend, more like a tiny tyrant." At exactly 10:29 p.m., after all his mad dashing, Lucas finally arrived at Julian's door, suitcase in one hand. Julian glanced at the clock, opened the door, and looked out at Lucas, who stood panting in the hallway. After a brief silence, he said calmly, "You're late." "No way," Lucas said, reaching for his phone. Julian pointed to the clock in his dining room. In my house, we go by my time. Oh, come on, Julian. That's ridiculous, Lucas muttered, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. He dropped his suitcase by the entryway. You don't get to decide what counts as late. I'm coming in tonight whether you like it or not. Julian took the bag of rice pudding from his hands and gestured at a pair of striped slippers by the door. Wear those. And I hadn't even stepped into your house when you started the countdown. My phone synced to the hospital network. There's no way. Lucas was rolling up his sleeves, ready to argue the logic of it, when he suddenly stopped mid-sentence. Wait, what did you just say? Julian gave him a glance, then turned and carried the rice pudding into the kitchen. It finally clicked. Still standing in the entryway, Lucas shouted, "Did you just tell me to change into house slippers?" Julian pulled one pudding from the bag and took a bite. The texture was even better than expected. Soft, translucent, delicately sweet, with a hint of chewiness that paired perfectly with the tender red beans. It left a lingering fragrance on the tongue. His cravings satisfied, Julian glanced down at the remaining puddings and, for a moment, felt something close to happiness. He also decided that Mr. Overly dedicated deliveryman Lucas was now officially redundant. He walked back toward the door with the half-eaten pudding in hand. Ask again, and you're out. Lucas obediently shut his mouth and changed into the designated slippers. Is it good? He asked, casually picking up the bottle of sanitizer Julian had left on the entry table and rubbing his hands clean. Julian nodded and handed him the bag. You eat them, Lucas said. I don't like sweets. Julian looked at him, hand still outstretched. They stared at each other for a few seconds. Lucas sighed, caved, and grabbed one, popping the whole thing into his mouth. Julian was still watching him. After a pause, Lucas glanced at him and tested the waters. Not bad. Julian's gaze softened. Understanding immediately, Lucas launched into an over-the-top poetic rant about how incredible the rice pudding was, praising its texture, flavor, spiritual resonance, with the full vocabulary of a food critic. Only then did Julian turn his eyes away, finally satisfied. But when he watched Julian polish off pudding after pudding, until the huge bag was nearly empty, then turn and casually ask if there were more, Lucas realized he might not know Julian as well as he thought. He regretted giving the driver so many. Seeing Lucas go quiet, Julian realized that was probably all he had brought. He went to wash his hands and, feeling slightly overstuffed, leaned against the doorframe to digest for a moment. Why did you buy only red bean? He asked. I thought you liked red bean? Julian paused, hesitated for a moment, then finally asked, How did you know? Every time we passed that shop, you'd stare at the red bean sign for half a minute. I'm not blind, Lucas replied casually. And if someone can't notice details like that, they've got no business being a doctor. Julian felt oddly complicated. I'm exhausted, Lucas groaned, stretching. You really put me through it. I took a cab from the hospital to the dessert shop, ran all over to get the puddings, went home to pack, then drove here, and half the way I was running. My legs are falling off. Thankfully, he still had a car at home. If he'd had to rely on finding another taxi this late, he probably wouldn't have made it. He stood up and reached for his suitcase. Where's your bedroom? I'll drop my stuff off. Julian stepped in front of him without a word, pointed to the couch, and handed him a bottle of rubbing alcohol. You're sleeping here. Wipe down your suitcase first, especially the wheels. Seriously? Lucas said. If I'm not in the same room, how am I supposed to take care of you? What if you cramp again in the middle of the night and I don't even hear you? Julian looked at him and said, with a raised eyebrow, Then go make a bed on the floor in my room. I can't even get the bed. Lucas whined, half serious, half joking. You're so heartless. I've got cervical and lumbar spine issues, you know. Julian's expression flickered. It's mainly because you... He trailed off, but Lucas immediately filled in the rest. Wait. Julian, it was an accident, okay? I'm not that kind of guy. I don't have any ulterior motives toward you. I was drunk. I mean, yeah, but I didn't plan to. The more he tried to explain, the worse it sounded. Finally, unable to stand Julian's stare, he raised both hands. Fine. Floor it is. After all, he hadn't forgotten why he was here. It was natural for Julian to be on guard. Even if Lucas swore he was a straight guy, even he couldn't deny one thing. He'd shared a bed with Julian once and ended up getting him pregnant. Even he had to admit that was the kind of situation that would get anyone labeled a scumbag. Julian nodded toward the nearby hallway. Bathroom's there. There's a mop next to the tub. After you shower, make sure to dry the floor. I hate water on the tiles. Lucas stared at him, stunned. You do realize the word bathroom has the character for water in it, right? It's supposed to be wet. Julian shrugged like that wasn't his problem, then picked up his tablet and went back to the bedroom without another word. Lucas sighed. Well, responsibility's responsibility. Lucas reminded himself that he had come here to take care of Julian, to make up for his mistakes. There was no need to argue over this now. He would endure the humiliation for a few days and wait until Julian's condition improved before addressing anything else. Julian's apartment was more or less what Lucas had imagined, just like the man himself. Gray and white tones, a minimalist Nordic style with pale wood furniture, everything meticulously clean and organized. Cold, distant, impersonal. Clearly, he lived alone. In the bathroom, the shelf held only the most basic toiletries, clearly untouched by anyone else. Following Julian's instructions, Lucas first carried his suitcase into the bathroom. He wiped it down carefully with alcohol and tissues, took a hot shower, changed into loungewear, and then leisurely strolled to Julian's bedroom door and pushed it open without knocking. Julian was shirtless, in the middle of changing into a soft cream-colored pajama top. A red mole on his chest stood out sharply against his pale skin. Lucas froze. Julian instantly yanked down his shirt and shot Lucas a fierce glare. No. One ever taught you to knock before entering someone's room? Lucas wanted to explain. They were both men. What was there to be shy about, or even ask? Hadn't Julian already finished showering and changed earlier? Why was he changing again? But his body reacted faster than his brain. Julian watched, speechless, as Lucas's Adam's apple bobbed. The thin fabric of his loungewear did nothing to hide the change in his body. It was all too obvious. Julian's expression turned from irritated to dumbfounded, then flushed with rage. He picked up a pillow and hurled it at Lucas's face. Get out. Wait. I can explain. Lucas clutched the pillow, stunned. Julian stormed over, pushed him out, with 3 quick steps, and slammed the door shut. The bed was still half made from when Julian had prepared the sheets for Lucas. The blanket was oversized, and Julian had worked up a sweat, stuffing it into the duvet cover. That's why he had gone to change again, only to have Lucas barge in like it was nothing. Forgetting to knock was one thing, but reacting like that? Julian had almost convinced himself to forget that absurd night. But Lucas's behavior tonight brought everything crashing back. He grabbed his phone and furiously began to type, ready to kick this wolf in sheep's clothing out of his apartment. But before he could finish 2 words, a stabbing pain exploded in his abdomen. It surged up his spine like an electric shock, hijacking his nerves and sending a cold sweat down his back. It felt like his body was being torn apart. His strength vanished instantly. With a dull thud, his phone slipped from his hand and hit the floor. He didn't have the strength to pick it up again. He gripped the edge of the bed, sank onto the futon he had just laid out for Lucas, and curled up in a ball, hands clamped over his belly. Sweat beaded across his pale forehead. He forced himself to breathe deeply, trying to adapt to the sudden pain while reaching for the phone. Again, the screen was shattered. He wasn't sure if it was just the screen protector or the glass itself. His hand shook as he tried to unlock it, only for the screen to go black. Damn it. He tossed the phone aside. Lucas had barely stepped away after being kicked out when he heard the commotion inside. He had been debating whether to message Julian an apology, but now he didn't care. He knocked on the door. Julian? What happened? Julian opened his mouth to respond, but pain made it hard to speak. The silence only made Lucas more nervous. The earlier reaction he'd been having faded completely. He tried the door. It was locked. Julian must have locked it when he kicked Lucas out. Lucas stared at the lock for a second. Then, jaw set, he stepped back and kicked hard. A loud crash. The lock gave out. The door burst open. Julian was sitting on the floor, directly facing the door, his face filled with disbelief as Lucas burst in. "You," he gasped, at a loss for words. The bedroom key was literally hanging on the hook in the entryway. Lucas could have just gone to get it, but no, he had to destroy the lock. "What's wrong?" Lucas asked, showing zero remorse for his destruction. He knelt beside Julian and gently placed his hand over Julian's, massaging his abdomen in firm, steady circles. His hands were warm, and the heat seeped through Julian's skin. Slowly, the color began to return to his face. "Your lower abdomen?" Lucas murmured. "Maybe our daughter's trying to make me stay." Julian shot him a glare. "Want me to call an ambulance?" Jaw clenched. Julian took a deep breath and replied, "Let's wait and see." The pain had come swiftly and violently, though it had now begun to subside slightly. Julian remained curled in a hunched position with knees drawn in, which helped ease the discomfort. Any sudden movement or shift in posture might only make it worse. And with that inexplicable baby in his belly, the thought of going to any hospital made his skin crawl. Every hospital nearby was one where his old classmates worked. True, the odds of bumping into them on a night shift were low, but if it happened, Julian might as well kiss his reputation goodbye. Lucas quickly figured out what was holding him back and didn't press the issue further. Julian let him continue pressing on his abdomen, brows furrowed. "Is it cramping pain?" Lucas asked. Julian nodded. Lucas grew more serious. "Could be intestinal spasms." "Seems like it," Julian said weakly, only managing one word. "Was it the rice pudding?" Lucas muttered, self-diagnosing aloud. "You definitely ate too much." "Julian, you really don't know your limits," Lucas chided as he massaged Julian's abdomen, his tone full of exaggerated scolding like he was lecturing a difficult patient. "That stuff's hard to digest to begin with. And the way you eat random crap all the time, your stomach's probably already a mess." "Hey, Julian," he said, suddenly remembering something. "Do you often skip breakfast?" Julian pretended not to hear, but Lucas wouldn't let it go. He launched into a tirade like a monk who just caught Sun Wukong smashing the fake white bone demon to death. "What is wrong with you? Aren't you a doctor? Don't even know how to take care of your own body? Forget your stomach. Did you know skipping breakfast increases your risk of gallstones? There's no literature to support that." Julian really didn't have the strength to argue, but once he felt better, he was absolutely going to throw some research papers in Lucas's face. Professional doctors should know better than to spread pseudoscience. Lucas waved off the rebuttal. "Forget the research. I'm telling you, skipping breakfast is terrible for your health. For example," Julian raised a hand to his mouth, weakly made a shush gesture, then pointed to his stomach and clamped both hands over his ears. "Hurts." Lucas froze mid-sentence, glanced at him, and after a long pause, clicked, his tongue in frustration, but finally shut up. Beside Julian's bedroom was a bay window. Moonlight spilled in through the glass. Being on a high floor offered a wide, clear view. The two doctors, who would usually be at each other's throats during the day, now sat side by side in complete silence. One furrowed his brows in discomfort while the other professionally massaged his belly. The only sound left in the room was the rustling of fabric, a rare moment of peace. No one knew how much time passed before Julian's pain fully faded. He licked his dry lips. Lucas made a motion to speak. Julian, wary, stared at him. But Lucas only said, "Want me to get you some water?" Julian let out a breath of relief, though he couldn't help feeling a bit guilty. for assuming Lucas was about to nag again. He pointed toward the nightstand. "Glass is over there." Lucas followed the direction he pointed and froze. He had burst into Julian's bedroom twice tonight, both times in a panic. He hadn't really taken in the surroundings. Now he did, and was stunned. Julian's bedroom looked nothing like the rest of the apartment. If Julian weren't lying right there, Lucas would never have believed this. Was his room. The nightstand was piled high with random clutter. The bed was a mess, with pillows scattered everywhere. A nearby chair was buried under a mountain of unfolded clothes. A scarf dangled from the ironing board. Most outrageous of all, the room was full of stuffed animals. What had seemed like normal disorganization now looked like a plushy explosion. "You're a grown man. Why do you have so many stuffed animals in your bedroom?" Lucas grumbled as he tugged Julian's water glass free from beneath a teddy bear. "Don't tell me you sleep cuddling this pink rabbit with freakishly long ears." "Give me the bunny," Julian said calmly, waving his hand. The rabbit looked old, probably years of wear. Lucas handed it over, and Julian propped himself against the wall, hugging it to his chest. "That's not just any stuffed animal. That was my first surgical subject. My mom said I loved plush toys as a kid, especially cutting them open and sewing them back up. She thought I was born to be a doctor, to encourage my talent. She bought me tons of dolls to operate on." The pain had left Julian looking paler and softer than usual. His voice was low, almost floaty, like it might drift away at any moment. And with what he'd just said, it was like the beginning of a horror movie. "Lucas." He looked around again. Just moments ago, the stuffed animals had seemed cute. Now, under the dim lighting, they felt creepy. Dozens of little black eyes silently stared at him. His back broke into a cold sweat. Julian caught the look on his face and for once smirked mischievously. Before Lucas could realize he was being played, Julian smoothly returned to his usual deadpan, stroking the bunny's ears. "Water? Oh, right. Almost forgot." Lucas went to the kitchen, filled a glass, tested the temperature, and returned. Maybe the warm water helped clear his head, but the chill on his spine was finally gone. He handed the cup to Julian, who drank a few sips and set it down amid the ruins. "I just can't picture it," Lucas said. "Every day, you show up perfectly, ironed, not a single wrinkle on your shirt, all your buttons fastened to the top, and yet you crawl out of this chaos every morning?" Julian shot him a puzzled look. "What did you expect my bedroom to look like?" Lucas thought for a moment. Neatly folded sheets, hospital corner bed, spotless nightstand, cold, serious. Basically like, no one lives there. Julian raised an eyebrow. "That's not a bedroom. That's a morgue." "Fair point. Grab the spare phone from the drawer," Julian said. "Swap my SIM into it." Lucas glanced at him. He understood. Julian was worried that the hospital might call him in. Even if he wasn't on shift, doctors with real skill got called in for emergencies, big surgeries, impossible diagnoses. You couldn't just ignore them. Lucas made the swap and handed the phone over. "If the hospital calls tonight, I'll go instead. You need to rest." Julian stretched a little, now feeling much better. He tested the phone, signal and call function, then glanced at Lucas and said, "Didn't someone say he wasn't covering my night shifts anymore?" Lucas didn't even blink. Whoever said that must be rude and unreliable. Julian gave him a long look, then slowly climbed into bed, bunny in hand, cocooned himself in his light gray blanket, and said, "Lights off." Lucas blinked and asked hesitantly, "So, I'm really sleeping here?" Julian turned over and didn't reply. He lay there quietly for a moment as if he hadn't heard. It wasn't until Lucas turned off the light and lay down that he finally gave a soft, sleepy Then, Lucas said, "If anything happens during the night, or if you don't feel well," he pointed at the pink bunny Julian was holding, Just throw that at me. I'll wake up for sure." There was a short pause before Julian, back still to him, said, "Okay." The moonlight was gentle. The quiet bedroom felt extra peaceful. The bedding soft and warm. Lucas fell asleep quickly. His mind drifted off. Within minutes. Maybe it was because the night had been so exhausting. Or maybe because from where he lay, he could just make out the circle of plush toys in the room. Either way, Lucas drifted into a dream, half asleep, half awake. In the dream, he saw a young child sitting at the edge of the bed. The child's face was shadowed by the night, and Lucas couldn't make out any features, only the vague outline of his movements. The child held a pair of shiny scissors, gleaming white in the moonlight. Lucas's heart skipped. He watched as the little boy began cutting open the belly of a raggedy doll, all while letting out an eerie little laugh. And then, the dolls in the room all started to move, laughing. One by one, they joined in, creeping toward him in a circle. "Oof!" Lucas shouted aloud, jolting awake. The stuffed animals were still there in the dim moonlight, their plastic eyes gleaming just enough to make his skin crawl. He instinctively looked over at Julian's bed. Julian was still fast asleep. Maybe he had turned over in his dreams. Now, he was facing Lucas, with his eyes closed, framed by tousled bangs and fluffy blankets. His face was calm and serene, nothing like the terrifying doll child in Lucas's dream. Lucas stared at him. The rapid pounding in his chest gradually slowed, his thoughts settling. He didn't know how long he sat there watching Julian. After a while, Julian suddenly mumbled something in his sleep. Lucas didn't catch it. "What?" he whispered. He inched forward, leaning against Julian's bed. His hand rested on the edge as he brought his ear closer to Julian's lips, waiting. But all he got was more muffled, unintelligible murmurs. Lucas chuckled to himself. Why am I talking to someone who's asleep? Just as he was about to roll back into his own bedding for another nap, there was a soft rustle. He felt something warm brush the back of his hand. Startled, Lucas looked down. In the moonlight, he saw Julian still cradling the old bunny, but his hand had slipped out from under the covers and landed gently over Lucas's. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. Then he heard Julian, still deeply asleep, say clearly and with perfect enunciation, "Lucas Shaw is an idiot." Lucas silently retracted his hand and pulled his blanket up to his chin. He would have rather not heard that. Early the next morning, Julian got up to find breakfast already set out on the dining table, along with his poor, battered phone. After washing up and drying his still damp hair, he sat down at the table and picked up the phone. The cracks in the screen were gone. It seemed Lucas had taken it out to get repaired while picking up breakfast. He pressed the power button. Sure enough, the screen lit up. The SIM card had been reinserted, and the phone interface was paused on his chat with Lucas. Julian silently deleted the half-typed message he had intended to send, only to see Lucas had already left a new one. "I went to the hospital first." Julian blinked. Just as he put down the phone, it chimed again. Lucas had sent another message. "Don't forget to eat breakfast. Send me a photo after. I'm going to check." Julian. At least when someone waves a chicken feather like a command flag, they have a feather. Where did Lucas get the confidence to check on? He let out a faint teach and didn't reply. But out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the food on the table. There was a clear glass of warm milk, a golden fried egg, glowing in the morning sunlight, and beside it, a small bowl of vegetable salad, bright, green and fresh, probably to balance the richness. It was surprisingly aesthetic. Julian looked at the phone, then back at the food. Just one bite. He picked up his chopsticks with perfect detachment, as if the action was purely spiritual. Of course, even if he finished the whole meal, he would absolutely not be sending Lucas a photo. Downstairs in the residential complex, Lucas Shaw slipped his phone back into his pocket. His forehead was drenched in sweat. He had just finished his morning run. He drove straight to the hospital, took a quick shower, changed into his white coat, and sat in his office. It was only 7 o'clock. The night before, he'd had a nightmare. Then he dozed off again and had another dream. This one less terrifying but still strange. When he woke up, he couldn't remember exactly what it was about, but he was pretty sure it involved Julian Grant and something vaguely ambiguous. Just realizing that was enough to make him bolt upright when he saw Julian this morning. He had rushed through a cold shower, didn't wait for Julian to wake up, and threw on some athletic clothes to run out for breakfast and to get Julian's phone repaired. Then, before Julian could wake up, he left the apartment to jog a few laps around the neighborhood. Lucas figured he was probably just overheated, so he chose exercise as a way to clear his head and shake off those bizarre impulses. But now, even sitting in his office, he still felt a little unfocused. He suspected something inside him might be malfunctioning. He couldn't wrap his head around it. Sure, Julian was his first ever sexual partner, and yeah, the experience had been intense. But come on, he was a grown man, not some baby bird imprinting on its mother, getting turned on with a single glance. He'd been a doctor for years. He'd seen so many bodies, old, young, male, female, alive, dead, and had always maintained his professionalism. Nothing like this had ever happened before. Why was Julian different? Sure, Julian had a great body. That mole of his could be considered a little seductive, but Lucas was straight. Even if Julian were a literal goddess, he should still be able to remain indifferent. The thought made his face stiffen slightly. Out of nowhere, a thought popped into his head. One he had never, ever considered before in his life. Holy shit, am I not straight? The idea was so radically out of sync with everything he believed about himself. He broke into a cold sweat. Desperately, he recalled his college years when he'd lived in a dorm full of guys who ran around naked all the time, and not once had he been tempted. Misdiagnosis, he decided. Misdiagnosis for sure. Lucas scribbled the words misdiagnosis across his mental chart with brutal finality. There was no real difference between Julian and his old roommates, just that instead of 6 guys to a dorm, now it was 2. Same concept, just more personal space. Avoiding Julian would only make him look guilty. Lucas refused to believe that Julian had bewitched him for life. At worst, it was temporary. Eventually, his body would fall back in line with his rational brain. Even if Julian were some reincarnated siren, Lucas would be Odysseus, immune to the song. Of course, Julian had no clue that Lucas was spiraling into a full-blown, delayed puberty episode. That morning, Julian walked into the office without even saying hello. Before Lucas could open his mouth, a call from pathology whisked Julian away. Dr. Grant, this patient, Ruan Shufang, she's yours, right? Julian took the pathology report, after having Ma Hao escorted out by security. The other day, Julian had ordered further tests for Ruan Shufang. He had already suspected something during the initial consultation, and pathology's latest cervical screening only confirmed it. Highly suspicious for squamous cell carcinoma. He returned swiftly to OBGYN, pushed open the door to Office 3, and called out, "Shaole." He handed her the report. "Call her immediately. Tell her to come in. I'll send you the requests for the colposcopy and cervical biopsy in a minute." "Got it, Dr. Grant." Shaole took the report and suddenly realized this was the same patient from the day before. The final test results weren't in yet, and they still needed a biopsy to determine the cancer's type and stage. But even so, she sighed quietly. Unlike the day before, when Ruan Shufang had been reserved and hesitant, this time her husband, Ma Hao, stormed straight into the office. "Dr. Shao," he called out, eyes red and hands shaking. He seemed like he wanted to say something, but remembering how he had nearly hit her the other day, he hesitated, lips moving but nothing coming out. Beside him, Ruan Shufeng was already crying uncontrollably, her face soaked in tears. The usually quiet Office 3 turned into a chaotic scene. Shaolei ignored Ma Hao. She handed Ruan the new test request and spoke gently. "Let's run the staging first. Try not to panic." That was all it took to make Ruan cry even harder. Scenes like this played out constantly at a city medical university's Jihua hospital. Shaolei had seen many cases like this before, but each time still hit her somewhere deep. Before the couple could even process the situation, Julian had already called from pathology with the next step. "Get her admitted. Any beds open?" he asked, eyes on the report. "One just opened this morning," Shaolei replied. "But her emotions are all over the place. She won't listen to anything I say right now." She had been trying to calm Ruan down, but the sobbing just kept escalating. It had already drawn a crowd of onlookers, and Shaolei was starting to feel frantic. Dr. Grant, a nurse from the OR, stepped out. "The next surgery is prepped and anesthesia's done. You need to get in there." "Coming," Julian said. Then, into the phone. "Can you manage her?" Shaolei hesitated. She'd wanted to ask him for help, but hearing how busy he was, she swallowed it. "It's fine, Dr. Grant. Start the admission paperwork," Julian said. "Tonight, I'll go with you to talk to her." Julian was usually very busy. Unless the case was unusually complex, all admissions, explanations, treatment plans, and pre-op briefings were handled by the residents. Although Ruan had been diagnosed with cancer, hers was in the earliest stage. Normally, no attending would accompany a resident for a case like this, but in moments like this, nothing made more of an impact than hearing your mentor say, "Don't worry, we'll handle it together." Shaolei held the phone tightly, her nose stinging with emotion. But Julian had already hung up. She set the phone back on its cradle, took a deep breath, and turned again toward Ruan Shufeng. Fresh white sheets were laid on the hospital bed, the strong scent of disinfectant filling the room. As Ma Hao helped Ruan Shufeng onto the bed, the couple, after hearing Shaolei's repeated explanations and reassurances, seemed to have regained some sense of rationality after the shock. There were already patients in the other two beds in the room. The one on the left was unoccupied for the moment, though the nightstand was piled with personal items. In the right-hand bed sat a woman in a red floral shirt, hooked up to an IV drip. She waved a big palm fan and greeted the newcomer warmly. "Hey there, sweetheart," she said to Ruan. "Why are your eyes all red like that?" Ruan wiped her eyes with her sleeve. The doctor said, "I have cancer." "Oh dear. Is it early stage or late stage?" The woman, Auntie Kai, asked. "It's early stage, Auntie Kai," answered Shaolei as she happened to walk in. At that moment, and overheard the conversation, Dr. Yu, Auntie Kai beamed at her and handed him an orange. "Here. Have an orange. My husband brought them from our hometown. They're homegrown and super sweet." Yu Sang instinctively pumped some sanitizer from the dispenser at the bedside, rubbing his hands as he smiled. "You're too kind," he said, politely declining. "I have to check on another patient in the next room. No time to eat right now." Then he casually asked, "How are you doing today? Any discomfort?" Auntie Kai shook her head cheerfully. "I'm doing great. You've got the best mindset in the whole ward." Yu praised her with a grin before turning his attention to Ruan Shufeng's chart. He was her primary doctor, and because of that, had visited most often, and knew her condition best. After Shaolei finished the admission paperwork, she had reported directly to him. He quickly confirmed the admission and payment details, glanced over the lab reports, then told Ruan, "Get some rest here first. If you feel any discomfort, just call the nurse." Just as he was about to leave, Auntie Kai waved the bag of oranges at him. "Again, Dr. Yu, if you're busy now, Take these to your office for later. It's just a few. I heard Dr. Grant likes oranges too. You glanced at the bag. It was transparent, and sure enough, it only held a few golden-hued fruits. He smiled and took them. All right, I'll give some to Dr. Grant and tell him they're from you. Thanks on his behalf. Seeing that, Mahao also picked up a small bunch of bananas and handed them to you. Dr. Yu, just a little something from me. News of Mahao's earlier aggressive behavior had long spread through the OBGYN department. Yu barely looked at him. He didn't even glance at the bananas. Instead, he gave Ruan a polite smile and left the ward. Mahao awkwardly pulled his hand back and looked at his wife. Auntie Kai was a talkative, straight-shooter kind of woman. As soon as Yu left, she leaned in and resumed chatting with Ruan. Cancer in the early stage isn't a big deal, dear. You know, I was diagnosed with stomach cancer 3 years ago. They cut out half my stomach. For the past 3 years, I've been going back for monthly checkups, terrified of a relapse. But guess what? No recurrence of the stomach cancer. I ended up with endometrial cancer instead. The doctor says it's actually worse than my last one. She smacked her thigh and sighed. My life's just full of drama. But look, I'm still here, ain't I? You can't let the tumor kill you, but don't scare yourself to death either. Everyone in this ward has something serious. You think you can find someone outside who's sick like us? Nope. But take a walk around the hallway and you'll see hardly anyone has hair. That's all from chemo. But they're all still living life. She sounded like a walking hospital guide as she pointed at the empty bed next to Ruan. The girl in that bed's only in her 20s. Younger than both of us. Pretty too. But guess what? She had a molar pregnancy. Weird, huh? Luckily, Dr. Yu said it's benign, much easier to treat than our type. Her voice was booming, almost theatrical. After her entire speech, Ruan stared in a daze. So, mine isn't really a big deal? Of course not. Big or small, just listen to the doctors. Then she launched into her personal story. Back at my hometown hospital, the doctor told me it was hopeless. Didn't even let me stay. Told me to go home and prepare for the worst. But I wasn't having it. I came to a city and got an appointment with Dr. Grant. He looked at my test results and said, it's treatable, but risky. Think about whether you want surgery. I knew right then I wasn't gonna die, Auntie Kai said, visibly excited. Now, she had forgotten to fan herself. I immediately got admitted and had the surgery done. My husband told me afterward the surgery took 9 hours. Dr. Grant didn't even eat. Worked straight through to get the tumor out. When I woke up, I felt so happy, thinking, how lucky am I? Dr. Grant even warned me to come back regularly for chemo and checkups to prevent relapse. She pointed to her fourth. This is my final round of chemo. My test results are excellent. Dr. Yu said I might live another 30 or 40 years. If I hadn't met Dr. Grant, I'd probably be buried by now. Mahao, hesitant, muttered. But Dr. Grant, he's a man. How can a man do gynecology? What's wrong with that? Auntie Kai snapped. Man or woman, if he's good. He's a good doctor. Clearly, Mahao's comment annoyed her. Let me tell you, Dr. Grant and Dr. Shaw are the top 2 doctors in this department, and they're both men. Mahao's face went pale, then flushed. Is he really that good? Better than Director Monroe? He had looked it up. Jiwa's OBGYN director was a woman named Monroe. You're clearly new here. Auntie Kai gave him a withering look. Don't be fooled into thinking the best doctor is always the one with the title. She was a regular at Jihua and well-versed in the clinic's inner workings. Dr. Monroe was a legend in her day, no doubt about it. But she's getting older now, close to retirement. Long surgeries wear her down. I heard she doesn't even operate much anymore. Dr. Grant and Dr. Shaw do all the major surgeries these days. Dr. Monroe just supervises. Don't underestimate male doctors. Look at surgery in general. Most surgeons are men. Why? Because they've got stamina. They can stand for hours without shaking. Some female doctors just don't have that kind of endurance. She scoffed like she was scolding her own son. You're looking down on Dr. Grant now. But what if he's better than your wife's current doctor? Mahao looked awkward. He glanced at his wife, then asked timidly, Do you think Dr. Grant might perform my wife's surgery? Auntie Kai was still annoyed. She rolled her eyes. No clue. He's a busy man. Mahao remembered that all the earlier consultations had been done by Shaolei. Maybe she would be the surgeon. He quickly offered Auntie Kai a banana and asked nervously, How is Dr. Shao in surgery? Auntie Kai gave him a long-suffering look but answered anyway. I wouldn't know. She had dealt with one of Dr. Grant's other students. She didn't know much about Shaolei. Mahao then looked at the bedside chart that listed Yu Sang as Ruan's attending. What about Dr. Yu? I asked him, she said. He said he doesn't have the qualifications to operate on malignant tumors. Then, as if realizing something, she added, And what did you do to upset Dr. Yu? He's usually so nice, always smiling, but today he barely looked at you. Auntie Kai had always been fond of gossip, especially neighborhood stories and idle chatter. Her large, expressive eyes hadn't lost their sparkle to age or illness. If anything, they burned brighter. She stared at Mahao, who looked like he had something to say but kept holding back. Her curiosity only grew. Ruan Shufang had been silent through it all. After Mahao's outburst at the hospital, she'd fought bitterly with him when they got home. The two hadn't spoken since, until she was suddenly notified by the hospital that she had a serious illness. She had been in a daze the entire way here, while Mahao stayed by her side, helping her fill out forms and pick up test results. She no longer had the energy to argue. But after listening to Auntie Kai chatter on and on, her nerves gradually settled, and some of her temper returned. She shot Mahao a cold glance and said to Auntie Kai, Honestly, I'm embarrassed just thinking about it. When I went in for my appointment, he stormed into the exam room and nearly attacked the doctor. As soon as she said that, Auntie Kai's expression changed. Wait a minute. You're that lunatic who tried to start a fight during Dr. Grant's consultation? She'd already heard about the incident the day before. News travels fast. In a hospital ward, and if there was one person who knew all the gossip, it was Auntie Kai. She had even spent the better part of yesterday scolding her young neighbor in the next bed over. Now the famous troublemaker was right next to her, handing her bananas. Auntie Kai bit into her last piece of banana and angrily tossed the peel into the trash. I just don't get it. Dr. Grant is a top-notch doctor, both in skill and character. What's your deal? Mahao's resolve had already started to waver, but faced with Auntie Kai's fierce tone, he still insisted stubbornly. He's a man, treating my wife's private area. Isn't that gross? I only made the appointment because it was a specialist consult, Ruan. Shufang interrupted. Doctors look at how to treat patients, not with those filthy thoughts. And if the doctor really was sketchy, don't you think I'd be able to tell? Auntie Kai's face darkened. So your wife has no issue with it, and you, the husband, are the one jumping up and down? She turned to Ruan and said, No offense, girl. I can tell you're smart and reasonable. But your man, he's trash. These doctors are out here saving lives on the front lines, and he's stabbing them in the back? Shame on him. Thank goodness Dr. Grant wasn't hurt. Do you even know how much time and money it takes to train one doctor in this country? No kidding, Ruan agreed, clearly not interested in defending Mahao anymore. In the past, she might have tolerated his temper, but now that she was sick, she didn't want to waste any more energy. She pointed right at him and said, Forget Dr. Shao not wanting to deal with you. I don't even want to talk to you. You Auntie Kai shook her head in frustration, clearly fuming. You probably didn't know. Doctor Shaw's the one who called security that day. Now you've pissed off both of the best doctors in the whole department. Did you ever stop to think what your wife's supposed to do now? Ma Hao had already been snubbed by Nurse Yu earlier. Now, being hit from both sides by the two women in the room, he realized no one here had his back. Clutching his face, he sighed. All right, I get it. I was wrong. He stood up. I'll go apologize to Dr. Grant, okay? He gently patted Ruan Shufang's shoulder. Then, with a wounded ego but determined tone, he declared, even if I have to lose all my dignity, I'm going to get Dr. Grant to perform the surgery. There were many surgeries scheduled for the day. By the time Julian Grant finished his last one, the sun had already started to set. He stopped by the front desk to pick up the slow-cooked soup he'd ordered earlier. It was lukewarm now. Back in his office, he had just taken 2 sips when the door was flung open with a loud crash. Before he could even react, a burly man had dropped to his knees right in front of him. Julian choked on his soup and stood up to help. He still remembered his early intern days, when he once witnessed a patient kneel and refuse to get up. His attending had no choice but to kneel as well, and the two of them had ended up bowing to each other in the doctor's lounge, an experience that had left Julian deeply scarred. Never in his life had he thought he'd be on the receiving end of something like this. Who's doing New Year's greetings in October? Said a voice from behind. Lucas Shaw walked in, saw the scene, and without hesitation, reached over the kneeling man's chest, hooked his arm under and, with a solid show of muscle, hauled him to his feet. Then he got a look at the guy's face. You. He immediately let go. If I'd known it was you, I wouldn't have helped. Ma Hao. Julian recognized him too. What are you doing here? Ma Hao, caught between standing and kneeling, was clearly stuck. The fire from the day before had long since gone out. His eyes were red, and he looked as if he'd lost a fight. He rubbed his face awkwardly and stammered, Dr. Grant, I came to apologize for yesterday. After he said it, he lowered his head and stared at his shoes. All the dramatic vows he had made to his wife earlier disappeared like smoke. His face flushed with shame. Lucas scoffed. What, you drop a coin on the floor? He stepped around Ma Hao and walked over to Julian, tapping the soup container with his finger. You've been drinking soup every day lately. Julian slapped his hand away. Before he could say none of your business, Lucas interrupted. I came to check. Where's your breakfast photo? Didn't take one. I don't believe you, Lucas said, holding out his hand. Give me your phone. Julian glared at him. No phone means you did take one. After a pause, Julian handed it over. Lucas opened the gallery, browsed for a few seconds, and chuckled. Wow, didn't think it'd be this easy to get into Dr. Grant's phone. Aren't you worried about privacy leaks? Julian replied coolly. I wouldn't give it to just anyone. Lucas raised his eyebrows. So I'm special? Julian ignored him. Lucas returned the phone. So really, no photo? Julian didn't answer. The album was empty. Fine, Lucas said. Tomorrow I'm watching you eat in person. This was how he would prove to himself and to Julian that his intentions were pure. Julian sighed. You like monitoring people so much. You should just go work in a prison. After I fix your stomach first, Lucas said, picking up the now cold soup. I'll reheat it in the break room. You come eat it later. Wait, Julian called out, but before he could finish, Lucas turned back to the third person in the room. Oh, you're still here? It was already Ma Hao's third time visiting Julian's office. Each time, before he'd been turned away. Julian was either in surgery or in a meeting. Now, overhearing the casual banter between these two men, Ma Hao panicked. Afraid Julian would slip away again, he threw aside all pride and quickly interjected. Dr. Grant, I came to ask if you could perform my wife's surgery. Please, I'm begging you to save her. That Dr. Shao. She's a woman, and they say male doctors are better at surgery. I didn't realize how skilled you were before. Please, I'm really worried. I only have one wife. I don't trust anyone else to operate on her. He had assumed, based on Auntie Kai's earlier comments, that Shale would be performing the surgery. There were so many misunderstandings in that one sentence that Julian didn't even know where to start. But Lucas spoke first. One minute you wanted to punch Julian, the next you're begging him to operate on your wife? He said, tone icy. You've got some nerve. He set the soup down with a thud. His voice was sharp, and he was clearly not done. You won't let a male doctor examine your wife, and now you won't trust a female doctor to do the surgery. You've really mastered the art of gender discrimination in medicine. Lucas Shaw's tone was biting, laced with sarcasm. The words hit hard. Ma Hao's face turned bright red. He opened his mouth, stammered for a long while, then finally said, I was wrong. I shouldn't have. Everyone in OBGYN had heard the story. Ma Hao had caused a scene because he didn't want a male doctor touching his wife. Lucas had heard the whole thing too. He and Julian Grant had dealt with this kind of sexism countless times. Since med school, most of the time, Lucas could understand patients wanting a doctor of a certain gender. But Ma Hao wasn't the patient. His wife had no objection, yet he'd still caused a public scene. Lucas just couldn't let that slide. Only when he finished speaking did Lucas realize Julian had tugged at his sleeve and was subtly shaking his head. Lucas's expression shifted slightly. Julian turned to Ma Hao and said, Don't worry. As long as you follow the treatment plan, I'll be the one performing your wife's surgery. If you want confirmation, you can ask Dr. Monroe, and don't be too nervous. The staging of Ms. Ruan's tumor is quite favorable. I'll stop by the ward later and discuss the surgical plan with you. Both. We'll aim to schedule it as early as possible. His tone wasn't sympathetic or overly gentle, just calm and professional. But that calmness had an anchoring effect. For the first time, Ma Hao felt like someone had finally put a floor under his feet. Lucas didn't know the specifics of Ruan Shufang's condition, but hearing the words tumor staging, he shot Julian a glance and finally realized why Julian had stopped him from continuing to scold. Ruan's diagnosis was clear: cervical cancer. Ma Hao looked genuinely devastated. Under the white hospital lights, even his gray hair seemed to have multiplied overnight. Julian looked at him for a second longer, then said, If there's nothing else, go back and be with your wife. She needs you more than I do. Lucas had to admit, scolding Ma Hao had been satisfying. But there was no need to pour salt in the wound now. Dr. Ma Hao asked tentatively, How long can my wife live? If the treatment goes well and there's no recurrence, she'll live like anyone else, Julian replied. It's a minor surgery. To the average patient, cancer sounded terrifying. But at Jiwa Hospital, where they treated critical cases from all over the country every day, Ruan's early-stage cervical cancer was indeed a minor case. Really? Ma Hao looked at him in disbelief. Even after Auntie Kai's optimistic stories, he still felt uneasy. He'd heard enough about cancer being a death sentence. His own aunt upstairs had passed from it in less than 3 months. I always thought cancer meant you were done for, he said, voice shrinking. My aunt had it too. Once diagnosed, she didn't last 3 months, Julian answered evenly. That depends on the type and staging. Your wife was diagnosed early. She's one of the lucky ones. TV dramas and word of mouth had convinced many that cancer equaled death. In reality, early detection often meant high survival rates, especially for cases like Ruan's. Julian had seen it often. With timely treatment, early-stage patients could have very good outcomes. Then Ma Hao asked awkwardly, You're not still holding a grudge against me, right? You'll still do the surgery carefully, right? Julian. Lucas cut in. If you're so worried about him holding a grudge, then quit hovering around. Dr. Grant doesn't have time for your nonsense. He herded Ma Hao toward the door, gently but firmly. Just as the door closed, Ma Hao opened it again and gave Julian a formal bow. Dr. Grant, I'll leave my wife in your hands. Word had it he'd cried like a child in the exam room earlier, begging for forgiveness, loud enough that the nurses had gotten complaints from other patients. Julian glanced at the doorway, then back at his now cold soup. Regret always seemed to come late. Fortunately, Ruan still had time left for him to make amends. You really are something, Lucas said, stepping closer, acting all cold and aloof. But you're actually a big softie. Julian didn't respond. Well, soft hearts come with a fine, Lucas added, slapping a yellow A4 sheet onto the desk. Julian looked down. A muscle twitched on his face. Fresh from admin, Lucas said, grinning. Sister Guo asked me to deliver this fine and cordially invite you to check the bulletin board. Sure enough, the OB/GYN bulletin board at a City Medical's Jiwa hospital now featured 2 matching notices, side by side. On the left, a disciplinary notice for Julian, reprimanding him for physically assaulting a disruptive patient. On the right, a commendation for Lucas, praising his calm and lawful handling of a medical disturbance. Lucas tapped the paper and read aloud, "Violence is not the answer. All staff, especially Comrade Grant, are encouraged to take Comrade Shaw as a role model in properly responding to medical disturbances." Julian rolled his eyes and tore the notice off the board. Beneath it was his actual fine slip. He read it aloud. Comrade Grant fined 200 yuan for assaulting a disruptive individual. Lucas pulled out a matching fine slip from his coat pocket and carefully glued it next to Julian's. Comrade Shaw fined 200 yuan for property damage. The 2 violent offenders locked eyes. Lucas, Julian said. I didn't post your slip. I know, Lucas said. Sister Guo was busy. I happened to be passing by, so I put it up for you. See, you didn't help me post mine, but I helped you post yours. Am I not thoughtful? You want thoughtful? I'll thoughtfully glue your mouth shut. Under the hallway lights, the 2 fine slips gleamed in perfect symmetry. Lucas crossed his arms and admired his handiwork, clearly pleased with how they complemented each other. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a 3rd slip, waving it at Julian. Admin usually issued 2 copies of each fine, 1 for the board, 1 for the recipient. Julian looked at the board. 1 copy was in his hand, the other was already posted. Face darkening, he asked, "Why do you have another one?" "I asked Sister Guo to print me an extra," Lucas said with a wink. "For the memories. Give it." Lucas neatly folded the 3rd copy and slid it into his coat pocket. "Nope, you're not getting it. Let it haunt you, Julian." Julian didn't know if men truly remained boys forever. But Lucas Shaw? He was clearly expelled from kindergarten for immaturity. Julian took a deep breath and said, "Why don't you go reheat the soup now?" When Julian Grant walked into the ward, Ma Hao was peeling an orange. For Ruan Shufang, seeing him, Ma Hao quickly put down the fruit and wiped his hands with a tissue. Dr. Grant. He stood up from the chair beside the bed, looking at Julian with a mix of embarrassment and unease. Ruan Shufang looked much better than before. She had been lying down earlier but now sat up as well, respectfully greeting him. "Dr. Grant." Julian gave a slight nod and didn't linger. "Finish your orange first. Come, see me afterward to discuss the surgery plan." Clearly, neither of them was in the mood for fruit. Julian had just called in Shaolei and a new rotating graduate student, only to turn around and find the couple already standing outside his office door. Julian held a folder in his hand and gave them a small wave before leading Shaolei and the student into the meeting room. "Have a seat," he said to the couple, then opened the folder. He turned to the student beside Shaolei and said, "Wang, Give a summary of the case. Wang had clearly prepared, though his voice trembled a little, and his speech was halting. Still, he managed to cover all the key points. Julian let out a quiet M&M, and Wang finally breathed a sigh of relief. Julian pulled out a stack of test results and medical reports from the folder and laid them out, one by one, in front of Ruan. Noticing Mahao craning his neck to see, Julian pushed a few pages slightly toward him so he could read more clearly. As he laid out each page, he gave a simplified explanation. Both husband and wife had calmed considerably since the initial shock and now listened. With focused attention, Julian had also replaced the more technical terms with plain language, making it easier for Ruan to understand. "Doctor, can I really still live a long time?" she asked. Though Auntie Kai had comforted her, and Mahao had repeated it once, now facing the man in the white coat, she couldn't help asking again. "In medicine, there are no absolutes," Julian replied. "But statistically speaking, the prognosis for early-stage cervical cancer is relatively good." With the basics covered, he moved on. "The main reason I called you today is to discuss surgical options." Ruan had two options: a cervical conization or a total hysterectomy. The former removes only the cervix, the latter removes the entire uterus. Julian confirmed that she had no intention of having more children. "In cases like yours," he said, "we generally recommend a total hysterectomy. The prognosis is better, and statistically, the recurrence rate is lower." "A total hysterectomy?" Ruan hesitated. "Then I won't have a uterus at all?" "The uterus is primarily for childbearing. It won't significantly affect your daily life," Shaolei added gently. "But Dr. Grant, didn't you say something earlier about Coney something? That one only removes the cervix, right?" Ruan asked, confused. "Based on current assessments, your condition qualifies for a conization," Julian said. "But the risks are higher," he explained. "When tumors are large enough to see, they can be cut out. But there may still be microscopic cancer cells left behind, which can later recur. For a non-essential organ like the uterus, complete removal is the safest approach. That's one reason cervical cancer often has a better outcome than cancers of vital organs." Ruan fell silent. She seemed to understand his meaning now. "We'll start with the primary surgery," Julian continued. "After that, you'll undergo 3 phases of chemo and radiation. The first round will be handled by our department. Shaolei will later transfer your case to oncology. Any questions?" Ruan bit her lip. "Doctor, I still want to keep my uterus." Julian looked at her. He marked a line on the chart with his pen and handed her the consent form. "If you choose conization, we'll still proceed with 3 rounds of chemo and radiation. The removed tissue will be examined mid-surgery. If we find positive margins, that is, traces of cancer cells, you'll still need a total hysterectomy. If the margins were positive, it would suggest invasive carcinoma, and her staging would need to be redefined. That could lead to more aggressive treatment, including lymph node dissection and removal of both ovaries and fallopian tubes." Ruan shook her head. "But doctor," she hesitated. "Without a uterus, I'm not a woman anymore." Julian's eyelashes flickered faintly. Before he could respond, Mahao jumped in. "Honey, your life is more important. If losing the uterus saves you, then so be it. Anyone who dares say you're not a woman, I'll beat them up." Julian looked at Ruan. "The main thing that maintains your secondary sex characteristics is estrogen from your ovaries," he said. "If the surgery goes smoothly, we'll do our best to preserve them." "It's not the same, doctor," Ruan said, pained. "I know if removing it saves my life, then fine. I'd accept it. But right now, it's optional, right? I'm willing to take the risk. I mean, I can't be the only person who's ever chosen conization. What are the chances I'd be the one to relapse?" Julian nodded. and patiently repeated the pros and cons of each. Procedure. You two can think it over. I'll come by during morning rounds. Tomorrow. Let me know your decision then. He closed the folder, clipped his pen back into his coat pocket, and walked out of the meeting room. Behind him, the student Wang hesitated. He had just joined the team and knew Julian's reputation for being strict. He whispered to Xiaolei, "Sister, Xiao, shouldn't Dr. Grant have tried harder to persuade her?" Xiaolei shook her head. She'd once asked the same question when she first joined, Julian had told her. It's the doctor's job to explain everything. Clearly, you might think the uterus is no big deal, but for some women, it's deeply symbolic. A good doctor never assumes. They prioritize the patient's values, especially with cancer, which is so closely tied to mental and emotional health. For someone like Ruan, who was resistant to losing her uterus, forcing the procedure might backfire emotionally and physically. Xiaolei remembered a past case where Julian had treated an elderly woman with severe genital warts. Other doctors had dismissed scarring concerns due to her age, but Julian had asked if she still had a need for intimacy. The elderly woman had nodded. So, the surgical plan was revised accordingly. People often judge others based on their own values or societal norms. But every patient is different. The doctor's job is to respect those differences. Xiaolei softly shared this with Wang, who nodded thoughtfully, eyes fixed on Julian's retreating figure. Meanwhile, Julian couldn't stop thinking about what Ruan had said. Her offhand remark echoed in his mind and made him lose focus for once. He walked back to his desk, set down his folder, and drank a sip of water. It had gone cold. He added hot water, took another sip, and sat quietly, for a moment, feeling an unusual fatigue. His baby was only 3 months along, but already a heavy burden to carry. He rubbed his sore back, sat still for a long while until his strength returned, then got up and headed to the parking lot. At home, he turned the key in the lock. To his surprise, the door opened. After just one turn, the lights were on. Only then did he remember. He wasn't living alone anymore. The feeling was strange, familiar, yet rare. He couldn't remember the last time he'd come home to a lit apartment. Lucas Shaw was in the middle of a video meeting. Seeing Julian, he gave a small nod, removed one side of his headphones, and after confirming Julian didn't have anything to say, returned to his computer. Lucas looked focused as he spoke occasionally, probably discussing research projects with students. This was his usual self, but after days of seeing the flirty, playful version of Lucas, Julian found this side almost unfamiliar. He pushed aside the odd feeling, set down his bag, changed into slippers, and headed for a shower. Steam fogged up the mirror, blurring his vision. Bloody surgeries, screaming babies, admin fines, reheated soup, the faces of Ruan and Mahao. And that glance Lucas gave him earlier, all flashed through his mind like a silent film. He suddenly felt very tired. After showering, Julian stood in front of the mirror, blow-drying his hair. With his free hand, he wiped the fog away from the glass. Even though he wasn't particularly vain, he could see clearly that he had lost weight. His jawline more defined. Without thinking, he wiped more steam away, clearing enough space to see his whole upper body, and then he froze. Something in his reflection made his hand go slack. The dryer fell, unplugging with a loud zap and spark. The room went silent. From the living room, Lucas called out, "What fell?" Julian didn't answer. His hair was still damp. Droplets clung to the ends. His eyes lowered to his abdomen, now slightly rounded, not visible under clothes, but undeniable in the mirror. Ruan's words echoed again. "Without a uterus, I'm not a woman anymore. Then what about someone who has one?" Julian stared at himself in the mirror. "What am I?" It was the first time he'd allowed himself to ask the question. He had thought about it before, but always buried it quickly. He avoided, looking at his changing belly, avoided the truth. But now, maybe he was too tired, or maybe Ruan's words had cracked, something open inside him. And once the dam broke, he couldn't hold it back. What am I? He looked at his reflection, too afraid to answer. In that silence, a strange image surfaced in his mind. If Lucas were here, he'd laugh, make some dumb joke, then, maybe with that annoying smirk of his, smash the mirror himself. So that's exactly what Julian did. With a loud crack, the mirror shattered. Some shards clattered to the floor. The rest stayed in place, spider-webbed with fractures. Julian looked down at his bleeding hand, then looked at his fragmented reflection. In the silence, he heard it, a set of footsteps, getting closer, beating in rhythm with his heart.
If this chapter moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nova Media. Thanks for listening.